everybody, it's James Adair again, and welcome to another episode of the Equity Accelerator podcast, where Chris and I have a conversation and we try to dive into, it's kind of starts, the starting point is equity in your home, as I am a mortgage professional with Sierra Pacific Mortgage and the PDX Home Loan team here in Portland, Oregon. But mainly we talk about the ins and outs of running a business, keeping your energy up, building equity in your finances, building equity in your own business, building equity in your fitness, your relationships, that kind of thing. So we're so glad that you jumped in and joined us. So Chris, hello again.
Hello, sir. Yeah, man, that's what I like about the metaphor of the Equity Accelerator. If it is a metaphor, like, as much as you're a mortgage guy, there are other areas in life that have equity, right? That we could actually build equity in our marriages and our relationships with our kids. I'm excited for our guest today too. I'll let you introduce him. But, I think even in our conversations, every conversation we have has a chance to build equity in a relationship with somebody. And so anyway, that's to serve the conversation. I love the metaphor. I think your show's awesome. I think you're really great, James. I think you're a really cool guy.
Oh, geez. Chris, all right, I'm going to stop you there. I'm really excited. I'm really excited about this episode. Another special guest. We're starting to get good at bringing on guests and interviewing them. This is an old friend of mine, Ivan Farber. He's a neighbor. He's my first ever business coach. He and I have kind of been lurking around some of the same parts of town for quite a while now. I must have met you in 2003, Ivan. And you yourself have been adjacent to the mortgage business for a while, but for the last, how many years?
12.
12 years. Geez. You have been with a large privately held financial services company doing basically an account manager, or a relationship manager there. And I'm so glad you're here, because you're here to share the fact that you published your very first book, and I love it. And I think it could be a great book for people in our listening audience. I think it would be very impactful for them, as most of the listeners of this show are in the real estate industry, in the mortgage industry, and they're always looking for an edge or a new idea or something to mastermind on, or something to obviously grow equity in their own business. So Ivan, why don't you tell us about your book?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm glad to be here today. Thank you for the opportunity.
Of course.
I wrote a book about conversations, and business conversations in particular, because I saw a need for it. Both the mistakes that I'd made, I wanted to make sure other people had the benefit of learning the lessons that I've learned. And I've been in financial services now 25 years,
right?
The last 12 with the same firm. So I've had an opportunity to see a lot of different things. And what I've seen is that people don't put tremendous thought into the conversations that they have. And yet, if you really look at the fundamental unit of our relationships and building equity and accelerating equity into our relationships.
I like what you did there.
Nice.
It's conversations.
Yeah.
It's absolutely conversations. So actually the last 10,000 conversations, I've paid very careful attention. I think what I've come up with is 10 lessons, 5 of which are kind of fundamentals for things to think about during a conversation, and then 5 steps for a conversation. It's not the only model, but it's a model that both I use, I coach to, I train, and encourage other people to use as well.
I love this because it is one of those things that, man, I've never thought about it. It's to call it fundamental isn't even quite right. It's fundamental to the fundamentals. So like what would you say, one of the first questions that comes to mind is, what's the thing that you would say is the most frequent mistake people make when they're having business conversations?
This is a mistake that not just people in the investments business, mortgage business, real estate business, or really any business where you have to have a little bit of expertise, is people jump right into the content, the topic, for instance, with a realtor, what's your price range and what neighborhoods are you looking at?
Right.
Instead of being needs-based and really having a conversation where you focus on your client's needs or your prospective borrower perspective?
I think I definitely do that. And Trevor, one of my business partners and mentors here in my office, always says, James, you're too quick to get into solutions mode. And I think is that what you're talking about? Because like sometimes people will come to me and like, I know exactly how to solve this problem, and they're still describing things to me, but I already know what to say. And I'm so excited to be there. Like, it's your lucky day, customer. I'm going to do this for you. And it's too much too soon. I haven't listened enough. And I probably drink too much caffeine to really master this more than I am now, but I definitely can improve there.
Ivan, what does it sound like? Sorry, I just wanted to jump in.
Please.
What does it sound like from a needs base? So if the normal conversation is, well, how many bedrooms are you looking for? What does the conversation sound like when it's needs based?
Well, I had personal experience. I've had personal experience with 2 real estate professionals for my own purchasing. The first one that we had was, what neighborhood, what's your price range? And the second one was, what do you want the process to look like? Because it's a really kind of intimate process to bring someone in to help you, especially on the purchasing side, to help you, what for us was first-time home buying. And James and I actually have in common a realtor that we both worked with in different capacities. So my first experience, the realtor understood price range, neighborhood, and didn't think we could afford it. So she already made the assumption we were going to need a fixer. We did wind up buying something that needed a lot of renovations. But what she wound up doing was taking us to different properties to find out how much of a fixer, instead of like having a conversation with us. And what she wound up doing was dividing my wife and I, because she'd say, well, now your wife thinks this is okay. What do you think? Instead of sitting down and really understanding how we buy things, what our behaviors are, how we like to be treated, and didn't listen to us too.
Well, that's the key. The last part, didn't listen. Yeah. I think one of the things that I've learned to ask frequently, because once is almost never enough, is it's not why, but you're really trying to get at why. So this person didn't really unpack, why do you want to buy a house? The words I use are, what's important to you about X?
Love that.
And then someone will say something like, what's important to you about the mortgage process? Oh, I just want a low payment. Right? I'm like, okay, well, everyone wants a low payment. What's important to you about a low payment? And then they say, oh, well, I'm nervous about, like, I've always had a lot of debt, and I just, I'm nervous that the kind of job I have isn't going to last. I might lose my job in a year. And I'm like, okay, now we're getting somewhere. Well, what would happen if you lost your job? And you really dig into and you get more emotional, and you get behind the reasons why, the motivational piece of why different components of, in my world, a potential mortgage setup should be set up one way or the other based on what's important to you about X, what's important. And you just keep asking over and over until you really strike gold.
So I call it peeling the pomegranate. There's the phrase that people say, peeling an onion has 10 layers. But if you've ever peeled a pomegranate, there's hundreds of seeds in it.
Sure.
And so I'm going to mix my metaphors here. I have a license to mix.
You're published author.
Yes. This is from the book. If you think about an iceberg, right? Like the iceberg for a realtor would be price, neighborhood, size, number of bedrooms. Underneath that is perhaps process, how you want it to go, how you want to feel. And then there's needs that people haven't surfaced. And as a professional, it's really, you add value to the degree that you can get really the needs underneath the iceberg, or in peeling the pomegranate, really make it really unfurled. So let me, if I may, talk about the 10 lessons in the book.
Please.
Because I think that would be helpful to give some context. So I think it always starts with building rapport. Rapport is really the essence of, do I like this person? Do I trust this person? And there are some people you just naturally have rapport with, but what about situations where it's not coming naturally? I actually write about scientifically how you build rapport. The second part of the conversation, the second lesson I learned was that using questions is very, very important. Asking questions is important. And people early in my career said, you don't ask enough questions. But I'd ask a question and it wouldn't always go well. So what I learned is how to use them skillfully, when to use an open-ended question versus a closed-ended question. The third chapter is about listening, and the chapter is just called Listen. And I always fond of quoting a Latin guy, Epictetus, who said you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So you should listen twice as much as you talk. The fourth principle is focusing on needs, and the fifth of the first 5 is exercise and self-control. Because what I see mostly is that people don't listen because they don't stop their mouths from talking and they're serial interrupting. So it's those 5 things that are really core and kind of foundational. And then the second half of the book is taking through the steps from preparing and planning for a conversation, how to create or open a conversation, how to explore or probe for needs, how to address needs and objections, and then wrap it all together with resolving the needs and resolving the conversation. If you sneak in the L into that last part, it's the acronym CLEAR. Create, listen, explore, address, and resolve. And I suppose I could have called the book something with CLEAR, but I didn't force that then. But the key is at each stage of a conversation, it's clear. So it's clear what we're going to talk about in terms of creating it. Then it's clear what we're exploring. And the definition of explore is that you have a clear, complete, and mutual understanding of the client's needs. So it's not even James as my mortgage guy. And by the way, I'll give a big endorsement for you. You are my mortgage guy. You did my mortgage in 2012.
It was a little while ago, yeah.
When I do it again, it'll be with you. I wouldn't even think about referring to anybody else. I don't have anybody else. And I think maybe we can come back to the success isn't a straight line last episode.
Right.
A little bit here, but the point being is that you understand my needs. You know how to address that. It's really important not just to address the needs, but also the objections that are natural. And then resolve and find a resolution. In some cases, that's a loan, or in the case of, we just talked last week, we did a dive into my debt.
Yep, a debt dive.
A debt dive, and my debt. Well, what would you say, Dr. Mortgage? How's my debt?
I like the kinds of debt you have. I think there are some, I think we decided that we could potentially refinance. You have a ton of equity. Mm-hmm. And you have an equity line of credit, which is flexible, which has a lot of benefits, but also has the potential downside of creeping up. It's not on a fixed rate. So if we refinanced you, you have the opportunity to basically have pretty much the same payment you have now, but maybe it was like $100 more per month. But the idea was, it was kind of a defensive refinance, meaning it's a good time to consider doing it now. Because if that second mortgage really creeps up to the point where you're like, I don't like this payment anymore, then we're not going to have low cost long-term debt available at the time. So you have to kind of either take the punishment now or push the risk off into the future. And I felt like, given your plans for doing a lot more home projects, it made sense to hold off, keep an eye on it. If rates drop, we would take another look at maybe doing it again. But anyway, so it was one of those kind of situations, and not every situation is a clear, yes, we should do this, or no, we should walk away. I thought there was an opportunity for you to do something, but anyway, we're probably getting too far afield here. But yeah, but for example, I mean, we had a great conversation, and I think we kind of decided to just keep an eye on it and not, it's not time to scramble the refi jets.
Right.
So, that's an example of, the kind of analysis we do. That was the equity analysis, active equity management for your real estate.
I like it.
Right. And the need you supported was the need to be defensive, perhaps, right? Because But what I came to you is I thought, well, okay, James can accelerate my equity. How can we do that? Now, obviously the big home renovation that I did, it's accelerating my equity.
Right.
And you used to come by when my house was elevated, and think about it and cheer me on in accelerating my equity.
That's right, Chris. Ivan did the thing where he added to the beneath his house. So he put his house up on these like these pilings, and then they remade the foundation. Well, you probably lifted your house ultimately by 5 feet or 4 feet or something like that.
Around
so you
that,
have
yeah.
more clearance in the basement.
Wow.
And it's all new concrete, and he added this awesome studio unit for short-term rentals. So he's got a cool thing going on.
I love that you asked that question, though, because I was trying to wait to see where you were going. I know you asked it for a reason, and to the point of like needs and asking the right questions. I think a lot of times, what you're so good at, and the reason why I love the active equity management stuff that you're doing is that it actually it implies that there's a bigger conversation that needs to happen. Like, it's not just a refinance, it's not just a mortgage. There's a bigger picture, but until we actually uncover what your needs are, what you're trying to accomplish, I can't prescribe any sort of action. I have to have a conversation, Ivan, to your point. Like, I have to have a conversation with you that uncovers that.
And I have to set up the relationship at close. And that's one of the things when people come to me now. I have this presentation I put on for people, and I'm like, this is how mortgages work. This is my role in the process. And my job is to help you create the right strategy. And then once you're under contract, the stress is elevated. My job is to make sure the process unfolds stress-free. But then I have a third role, and that's to stay in contact with you after the loans close and help you manage decisions on how we're going to repay your debt. Because the mortgage itself is just a single transaction, but you have your mortgage every month for probably the rest of your life. I mean, or certainly for the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years, so there's really no service in place to help you manage that. And that's kind of like what you do for people. I mean, how many clients would you say you have that you're in charge of? How much?
130 families.
130
families. That's okay. So, you probably want to talk to them 3 times a year. What do you have a tempo or different buckets? How do you organize that?
The minimum is 4 times a year, but generally I talk to people 8 times a year.
Okay. And you probably have copious notes on what the last thing you said was, and how much preparation do you like to have before you talk to, so you're just talking to these people all the time.
It depends on the nature of the conversation. It's important to do an annual review, just like the deep dive you could in theory annually.
Right.
For those you want to do more, but it really depends on the person and their situation. But I use my 10 lessons, which were definitely, there was mistakes and failures along the way to those lessons. 50,000 conversations, 10,000 of which directly led to it. But I basically use the 10 lessons first as a planning tool. Like, I go through, okay, how am I going to build rapport? What questions am I going to use? Okay, from what perspective am I going to listen? And which needs do I anticipate? But again, the key with focusing on needs and exploring needs is to get them to say what their needs are, not for me to tell someone else. And that's another big mistake that professionals make, because we're professional. We think people know what their needs are, and we're going to tell them what their needs are. But it's so much better if they tell us. So I came to a point where I realized it was more important for someone else to say what they needed and what they wanted than for me to tell them what they needed. So every conversation I think about that. I think about exercise and self-control. And then I think, what's my opener going to be? I can kind of stop there, because once I have my opener, I'm getting agreement for what the outcome of the conversation is going to be. And then I'm going to explore. And then I'm not going to assume what I need, the objections and the needs I need to address, because that's going to come out of the exploring. So
let me ask you this. You said, I'm going to decide what my opener is going to be, and we're going to agree what the conversation is going to be like. What's an example of an opener?
I'm calling to give you an update on what we're thinking and address anything on your mind.
Okay, gotcha.
And then
Yeah.
the important thing is then to button your lip and let them tell you what's on their mind.
An example popped in my head for real estate when you said it, where like a lot of times we tell people what they want. You know, an agent sits down with a seller and they say, listen, I know you want the most amount of money and the least amount of hassle with the least amount of convenience, or, you know, least amount of time, blah, blah, blah. Like that's so predictable. If you're in the industry, that's like what we're taught. But what I was taught way back ago was to ask the question so they could self-discover. It's always going to come out pretty much the same thing. If you're like, what's important to you about selling your house? And the three things, if you peel the pomegranate, will basically come up with, right, time, money, and hassle. Like those three things will come up, but it's so much more powerful, to your point, if they say it versus if we sit across the table and say, I know you want the most amount of money and the least amount of time and the least amount of convenience.
Yesterday, I had 3 40-minute conversations where I probably talked for 10 of the 40 minutes. And then the message people give you is, I really trust you because you listen.
Totally. Yep.
And listening is so important, but nowhere is it really taught. So I have a whole chapter about listening, the mistakes I made and the lessons that came from that.
What's the most memorable mistake you've made when you say that, when you keep referring to the mistakes you've made?
I mean, early on, I was so business focused, I didn't even say, hello, how are you? I'd call to speak with the husband and I'd say to the wife, is Mr. there? Yes. Okay, great. And then I asked my mentor, I'm like, the wife doesn't really like me. And she said, it's because you don't ever ask her how she is. So that was really fundamental, and I had a pretty nurturing mentor. This was back mid-90s. But I've had some hard mentors that I've affectionately called tour mentors along the way that weren't so nice. But that was like a real early one.
Ivan, what do you think of this? I mean, I know it's different because you have a relationship with these people you're having a conversation with, but a huge pet peeve of mine, and I didn't recognize it as such a pet peeve until I took the Keller Williams sales training class called Bold, where they talk about coming from gratitude. But instead, when someone calls me and I'm not expecting the phone call, I'm not even sure who's on the other line, and they're like, hey, is this James Adair? And I'm like, yes. And they're like, oh, hey, James, how are you? Pause. I always am just like, like, what are you selling? Right? I hate it when people ask me, how are you personally? Because I don't know that they actually care how I am. I think they're just sort of like, they're in this rhythm and they need to like kind of plant their flag, gather themselves and get ready for the big sales pitch. And of course, sometimes I make phone calls to people and I don't want them to feel like, hey, I'm selling them something. So what I've learned to say is, like, if I'm calling you, Ivan, you're like, hello. I'm like, Ivan, it's James Adair. I'm so glad I caught you. That's a difference between coming from, and it's like a statement instead of a question that I don't necessarily want the answer to. That's just something I personally do. I'm so glad I caught you. The reason I'm calling today is boom, you know.
Well, that was something my tour mentor taught me, was always state pretty early on, what's the reason or purpose for your call?
Right.
Because then that, as part of creating an agenda, you're laying something out there and you're proposing it. As far as the hi, how are you? That was the mistake way back when.
Right.
But as I've gone over time, we do want people to ask how we are, but I advocate asking a second and third rapport question so that you make sure that you really do take the time to establish rapport in each and every conversation. It's not, hi, how are you? The purpose of my call is to do a deep dive into your debt. It's like, how are you? What's going on in your life?
Yeah.
Then you do that. And then the purpose of my call is, I'd like to do a deep dive into your debt. My hope is that you'll want to refinance. I mean, which is your hope. I understand that.
It's not even my hope. My hope is that, my hope, honestly, when I do those conversations with people, my hope is just to make sure we're in the right loan. And I'm totally open to the idea that the loan you're in is the right loan. It was
Well,
the time we did it.
Yeah, you put me in it.
Yeah. So it's still good. But as your life changed, as your house changed, your needs change, your philosophy has changed since we did that loan. You were, 10 years ago, you were like, I'd want to get a 15-year loan, pay it down as fast as possible. Now you're like, no, I want to leverage and manage cash flow and accelerate my equity. So I'm proud of your shift there. Yeah.
Ivan, if you had to sort of wrap with some wisdom, in addition to people racing out to buy your book, to learn about, the model of the conversations, like what's possible? What do you see as possible? What's the possibility of, for the world? I mean, not if we can get that grandiose for a minute. If people were really to start to take on this type of an approach to conversations, like what's available?
A better business world. I mean, a world where people, both with clients and colleagues, where there was rapport, genuine rapport, where they really listened to each other and work towards resolutions such that everybody's needs are satisfied. That's kind of my long-term vision. One of the working titles that I had was called Conversation Lab. The idea that every time we get into a conversation, it's an experiment and we can improve and grow with that. My long-term vision is to actually have a training facility, conference facility with conversation labs, so people can really see how they are, either role play or see how they are with clients. Exactly.
You should come up with a system for other coaches to become Conversation Lab certified and to put on workshops.
Okay, I'll pay you a nickel for every time that I get a certification.
I need 6 cents. Actually, that's my fee.
6. Chris, people can find out more at my website, conversations.biz.
Conversations, plural, .biz. Conversations.biz. Perfect.
Love it.
.com wasn't available, but since they're business conversations,
it
worked perfectly.
I love it. I love that you got that. Conversations.biz. So
that's awesome.
So memorable.
It's really good.
And I can be followed on Twitter, LinkedIn, and the book's available on Amazon.com.
Awesome.
Really
Real
good.
quick, I just had an idea. Is there a domain that ends in .ns, like .ns? Then you could register conversatio.ns. It'd be just conversations. Anyway,
Conversation.
But I like conversations.biz.
Conversations.biz, people. Thank you, Ivan. Thank you. I love the work that you're up to. I think that's incredible. James, you're so smart, James, to have people like Ivan on your show.
I'm blessed. I'm hashtag blessed.
Around you. Hashtag you're cool. Hey, and James, if people want to learn more about your active equity management program, the things that you do to help real estate agents and or homeowners, like where can people go?
Well, as always, you can find me at my website, pdxhomeloan.com. And if you're not from the Portland area, you're probably thinking it sounds weird, but that's sort of the nickname for Portland, PDX Home Loan. I'm licensed in Oregon and Washington. If you want to talk about any kind of real estate, mortgage, financing kind of thing, I can directly assist you. And if you're from another state in the union and you're a listener to this podcast, I don't want to talk. I'll talk to you anyway. We'll talk about your mortgage and let someone else do it. That's fine.
Nice. Love it. Good stuff. Guys, great stuff. I always love the high-minded conversations. Thank you so much. Until next time, take care.
Thanks for having
me on.